See the ones. Ishwar Reddy Garu, can you hear me?
Sir, yes, sir.
Shall I share the screen and tell me whether you're able to see or not?
Yeah, you can try, sir.
You're able to see this. Ishwar Garu, are you able to see my slides?
No, sir.
Sir, try once sharing entire screen, sir.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. Now, can you see?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yes, sir. Now it's visible, sir.
So maybe because of the technical thing, you're not able to see me. I think let's get started with the presentation nevertheless.
Why don't you log out, sir, and log in again?
Right now, no, this is an external camera that we have. I think it will take a while to get started.
No issue.
While technical people attend to that, let's get started with the program. We are already late, unfortunately.
Yes, sir. Sir, Ishwar Reddy, sir, shall we start, sir?
Go ahead.
The introduction.
Good.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, respected speaker, Dr. Sudhakar Edla, sir, Professor of Environmental Engineering and Policy, Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai, and former Vice Chancellor of Dravidian University. And now I request Mr. D.V. Purushottam, Assistant Professor, Sri Vidyaniketan Engineering College, to introduce the guest speaker. Sir, please, sir.
Okay, Yuvraj, thank you. Yuvraj,
I
is it
request
visible?
everyone to mute yourself.
Yuvraj, is it
Yes, sir.
visible?
Visible, sir.
Yes.
Go
Good
ahead.
afternoon. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon to all participants. It is my privilege to introduce Dr. Sudhakar Edla, sir, for this session. Dr. Sudhakar Edla is a professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. It is a Reserve Bank of India funded national institute and deemed university in Mumbai, specialized in environmental engineering and policy. He is an acclaimed teacher and researcher with 24 years of teaching and research experience and strong publication record both in the top international journals such as American Society journals and other top league economic and development journals and books and book chapters. His research focus includes climate studies, urban environment management, sustainable cities, sustainable mobility, waste management, provision of urban services, study and development of eco-industrial parks, environmental economics, valuation of environmental services, and assessment of environmental and social economic impacts of development initiatives. Professor Edla won 11 prestigious national and international fellowships and won awards such as Fast Track Young Scientist Research Grant of BST, Government of India, Fellowship for Best Paper from GEF World Bank, Alexandria, Egypt, and also Best Paper at UNWIDER Helsinki. His papers were rated 4th and 9th most downloaded article from Elsewhere Top 25 by Elsewhere Publisher. Thank you, Yuvraj.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Now I request Dr. Sudhakar Edla, sir, to take over the session. Sir, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see the screen, please? The screen that I'm sharing with you.
Not yet, sir.
Okay. Now I think you can.
We
can see. Right, you can see the.
Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Okay. All right. So, thank you so much, Dr. Ishwar Reddy Garu, Professor Ishwar Reddy Garu, for inviting me to talk about this topic that I usually be talking about the past 20 years. And thanks to the gentleman who introduced me with kind words. I think it is my 4th time I'm talking at Sri Vidyaniketan. A wonderful place. I met the chairman Mohan Babu a couple of times, known to him personally. So it's always a privilege to get back to this institute and talk about something that I know and that can be of some help for across. Yeah.
You can go ahead with the slideshow, sir.
I will do that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And in today's session, I'll be kind of introducing you to the basic constructs of sustainable city. I would rather say sustainable science, the basic constructs of sustainable science, which is kind of defined for sustainable cities as such. And by explaining those basic constructs, I will try to present some case studies which explain some of the strategies that one should adopt as part of, or on the basis of the constructs that we discussed for the sustainable cities. So it's basically presenting the fundamentals of sustainable cities and the strategies that are required to move towards sustainable cities. I will present two case studies that we have done in the past. In fact, there were three I wanted to present, but then I thought too much material would be good for the listeners. Me being sometimes listener, I don't like too much material coming on to me, so I pruned it to two case studies. So it keeps misbehaving. I'm so sorry about that. Right. So moving further, sustainable cities essentially stem from something that you see on the screen, Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goals, as you all know, it is like there are 17 of them, and I'm privileged to be part of the Indian negotiation on Sustainable Development Goals. I have presented two technical papers, one on sustainable development and transportation, and the other is sustainable infrastructure and sustainable industrialization in the country. These two technical papers that I gave for UNDP, they are the basis. So sorry. They form the basis for Government of India negotiations in collaboration with UNDP India office. So as we all know, there are 17 such goals. Of all these 17 very, very important goals, there are three that directly or indirectly concerns with the cities. Of course, goal 11 is the goal for sustainable cities, which, when we say cities, we say communities, also basically sustainable cities. And that essentially makes cities and human settlements inclusive. Inclusive has a whole lot of story behind it, to be safe, resilient, and sustainable. Resilient, for example, for any climate changes or any natural catastrophes that happens, we need to build the resilience of the cities. It's not only a beautiful city, but they should be resilient cities. And also sustainable in the sense the consumption patterns, what we do, what we produce, what we discharge, all that has to be based on sustainable principles. So goal 11 defines the framework for sustainable development of cities, whether it's in India or anywhere else in the world. So that's the backdrop. If you look at the actual definitions of sustainable cities, there are thousands of definitions for sustainable development. Similarly, there are large number of definitions for sustainable cities as well. But then most accepted definition, as it is seen in the international platforms, is whether you call it sustainable cities or urban sustainability, they're all synonymous. Sometimes they call them eco-cities as well. So eco-city is a city designed with consideration for social, economical, and environmental impacts. A city that is taking care of economical aspects, that means the prosperity generating conditions of a city, environmental impacts, and social impacts as well. It has to have balance of these three, and most of the times these three pillars are basically referred to triple bottom line approach. So a city designed with consideration for social, economic, and environmental impacts, and shows a resilient habitat for, presents a resilient habitat for existing populations, that means the present generation of the city, without compromising the ability of future generations to derive the same or to experience the same. In fact, if you look at the WSSD's definition of sustainable development, it does tell the same thing. Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their requirements. Drawing on the same principle, this is the definition globally accepted. And of course, UN SDG 11 also gives a particular definition to sustainable city. It is like defines it as those cities that are dedicated to achieving green sustainability, social sustainability, and economic system. So as you must have noticed by now, there are three things: environmental dimension, social dimension, and economic dimension. There are three dimensions wherein things interact with it. But outside this interactive matrix, there is something called resilience. You know, the cities have to be resilient for the onslaught of various natural calamities, and also they should be sustainable. So, and they should be safe and sustainable. So this is the backdrop of sustainable cities that you see. And as you can see here, the ingredients of sustainable city, as you can see, there are green buildings, smart education, social responsibility one has to exhibit. Water management has to be on sustainability principles. There is sustainable energy as such, you know. Then health management has to be smart. And the e-governance, you know, the paperless governance has to come into place to make the city sustainable. Natural resources management has to be on sustainability principles. Efficient allocation of resources is important. Then we have sustainable transportation. We should not have all the diesel vehicles flying or polluting petrol vehicles flying, too many personal motor vehicles instead of public transport. That's not allowed. So the transportation has to be on sustainability principles. Waste management has to be less carbon intensive, less energy intensive, and less polluting as well. So that has to be like that. Then we have to have green building. So these are all kind of components presented for sustainable cities as such in the framework of sustainable cities. So having said this, as we have seen this sustainable city, the ingredients, it may not present in a comprehensive, exhaustive way, but these are the things that we do talk about in a component-wise within sustainable city. But when you look at sustainable city around the world, there are two ways of approaching sustainable cities. One is a compact city model, and other is urban sprawl model. They are absolutely tangential to each other. The compact city model, if you look at, it is just to show you a representative compact city. I just took it from some material, but what it actually says, it actually presents all amenities that are required for the functioning of the city, including the people, of course, people and the systems, in such a planned and compact way that the need for travel is minimized. The services are available at a very close proximity, and then the shops are planned accordingly and placed in such a way that for shopping people doesn't have to travel long distance. Similarly, schools are placed in such a way that they don't have to send their children on bus to go to school. So this is how a city, in a very compact way, and they nicely planned this road that cuts across the city, that radiates towards outside world, and there are rails and there are certain corridors. As you can see here, this is canal corridor, the blue one. It is kind of, you have a water body, they develop that as a canal corridor. So it is possible to develop a city which is geographically compact and meets all the necessary sustainability principles. Your transportation is unnecessary, transportation needs are avoided. Your energy is too much of transportation of energy and related losses can be avoided. People's need to travel is completely taken care, and the roads are designed in such a way that, for the feeder, mean to say main train line is there, for the people to, there is a feeder service requirement for metros, for example. Roads are provided in such a way the majority of the road space is for bicycles. It is possible to design a city within such closed geographical space, making it extremely sustainable, absolutely sustainable. That's one model. Japanese do work on those models. They are in fact the pioneers in developing these models. The next one is urban sprawl. But before going to the urban sprawl, I'll just show you some more details about compact city. As you can see here, it is possible to have an interlink of compact cities. A small hamlet, and then there's the green area between these two, and there can be another village kind of a thing, then there can be green areas. Then we have a small town, which is designed as a compact town, and then comes to compact city, which is designed as a compact city here. But they can be interlinked. If you go back to the previous slide, these lines cutting across, for example, are the lines that we are, arrows that we are seeing here. So it is possible to have micro compact cities, and they're all interconnected. If you look at the bottom one, you can see compact cities interconnected. This can be image. I don't know if I press this. It may actually. Okay, it's gonna go here. Yeah, so you can see a compact city model, which is a district, which it interconnect. If the each circle is one compact unit, and they are interconnected. Similarly, compact city model towns within each district, there are number of towns. Each town is one compact city, and they can be interconnected. And similarly, compact city model cities. So within district, there can be more cities, units which are compact again, and they can be networked together. So this is the essence of compact model approach to sustainable cities. And this is again as urban sprawl model. Of course, please do not read into details of this. All that I wanted to show you is urban sprawl is basically a system where CBDs are located elsewhere, the residential zones are located elsewhere, and they try to have these patches spread across the city so that the resources, the intensity of service provision is not felt as it is felt in the case of compact city. So urban sprawl is what many times Indian cities do follow. As you can see in case of Mumbai, for example, the city commercial district is in Nariman Point, and then people travel all the way to Bandra, Goregaon, Borivali, Dahisar, Virar Road, quite a far distance from the central business district, CBD, which used to be Nariman Point. Of course, of late, they have developed another CBD called Bandra Kurla Complex, but even then, there is quite a bit of sprawl that happens in case of Mumbai. Indian cities, most of the time, they are urban sprawls. We don't have too many examples of compact city, of course. But there is another type of a model that people do practice. And Indian cities, you must have seen smart city initiatives by the government of India, and also some of the state governments are taking it up actively, proactively rather. They do have this concept of sustainable city, but they call it smart city. There is a difference between these two. Sustainable city is a much larger domain. You can say it is a set, and smarter cities are a kind of subset within sustainable city, because it doesn't really, if you look at Indian initiatives to support cities development in the country, they do not talk about so much of economic augmentation of cities. See, they do talk about providing good sanitation, Swachh Bharat, and so on. They do talk about providing wonderful transportation system, metro and CNG, low-floor buses, and so on. They do talk about drainage system, but Indian smart city model seldom talk about how to develop the economic frontier of the city. So unless you take up all aspects, economic development, social aspects, and environmental aspects, We cannot call that as a sustainable city. So, but Indian model of sustainable city is more like a smart city. Make cities smart. Like, make Wi-Fi all over the city, so that you don't have to be kind of struggling for connectivity. Use the technology in transportation, so that the mobility becomes easier. So this smartness in doing all these services is what is perceived to be part of the smart city model. Okay, so that's what is Indian smart city models talk about. Now we have seen the sustainable city concepts at a UN SDG level. We have seen the fundamental types of sustainable city models, like compact cities and the urban sprawls, and we have seen how Indian government is looking at this sustainable cities as such. But then there is more deeper thing. Defining sustainable city on ecological footprints. There is something called eco-city concept. Sustainable city is one side of the same coin. Eco-city, it is short form for ecologically efficient city, has a different definition. There is another parallel track of eco-city literature, eco-city researchers, eco-city groups. They do work in the whole on a parallel track to sustainable cities. Okay. Now, what is that eco-city concept talking about? Is as defined by the International Eco-City Conference. As I said, there is a separate kind of I don't say mafia, but there's a separate line of researchers working on that. Is eco-city is defined as a living whole system. It is like, you don't call a city a town or something like that, but it's a living whole system, a natural human-made unit, a natural as well as human-made unit, having economically productive. That's extremely important to have economically productive character of the city. Without that, it cannot be eco-city, right? Nor sustainable city. So, economically productive and ecologically efficient industry, systematically responsible and socially harmonious culture. Systematically responsible and socially harmonious culture, and physically beautiful and functionally vivid lands. Not only the physical beauty of the city, but functional, you can say beauty, but functionality of the system is as equally important for a city to be called eco-efficient city, ecological efficiency. The place where I'm standing, Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, this is a beautiful architecture that we have. It has won second best award for the best architecture in the World Architecture Convention in 1989. So many architecture students do visit us to learn the architectural aspect of this place. But this is a beautiful landscape, beautiful architecture. But the moment monsoon starts in the month of June, no matter where you stand in this campus, you get wet. Close to your door, the office room door, you still get wet. So they say it is a what do you call that? Physically beautiful campus, but functionally it is one of the worst possible designs. So the point is, the cities not only that they have to be beautiful in the landscape, but it has to be functionally efficient as well. So ecologically efficient city has this definition embodying productivity, economical productivity in ecologically efficient industry, systematically responsible and also socially harmonious culture. The culture has to be socially harmonious, and then we have to have physical entities which are beautiful at the same time. Functionality is also essential. Once we have all these aspects satisfied, then only a particular city can be called ecologically efficient city. I do not have the clock with me. There should be a clock here. It's not functional. Give me a second, otherwise I'll be overstepping. Okay. So if you look at the ecologically efficient city, you'll find that this I thought this is more representing diagram for an ecologically efficient city, where you'll find all dimensions of the city as a system. You know, we have this mega solar panels installed in some part of the city where we have fairly flat land. Then we have smart houses to be constructed. Smart houses meaning very energy efficient and functionally efficient as well, right? Smart house construction. Then biogas fuels. We have farmland a little bit. We try to get biogas fuel from there. Then EV car sharing. You will implement this particular EV car sharing system in your city that makes your transportation very, very efficient. Then we have smart houses again. We have electric kind of system of electric transportation there. Then we have small to medium scale bridges. Instead of having larger bridges, it's good to have smaller construction. The construction also become ecologically efficient in that sense. We have multi-energy stations here. So, and a battery storage system here, wind tunnels, wind farm they call it, and environmentally friendly design buildings are here. So as you can see, multi-energy stations are here, and then smart houses again, and solar panels here, even not in the flatlands, but also within the city where we have large roofs for some industries and all that. All those roofs are covered by solar panel here. So what it presents, and we have kind of wind tunnels again in the water body. What it all talks about is it encapsulates all material that is required for the city to function. It ensures that all that actually is generated within. So you don't have to bring energy from somewhere, and you don't have to bring energy from fossil fuel driven energy source. So that makes your energy very efficient, very clean and green. At the same time, by going for efficient systems, your consumption of that clean energy is also coming down. So you're addressing that. The waste is taken care, the transportation part is taken care, the energy, the building, residential buildings and commercial buildings, they become more energy efficient. So all, and the landscape is used, but wherever you have landscape for suitable for solar, you're using it for generation of energy. So it is a kind of holistic approach to minimize the material coming into the city from outside for the city to function. And also try to minimize whatever you're throwing out of the city as waste or whatever it is. So this is a holistic approach that takes for ecologically efficient city. Now if I take you further on this, yeah. This is what exactly it says. EcoCity principles, it has two components. One is ecologically efficient production and ecologically efficient manufacturing consumption. Production is manufacturing and ecologically efficient consumption. These two put together forms a city. That's quite obvious that whatever we produce within the city has to be ecologically efficient. That means ecologically efficient production. And whatever you consume in the city should be ecologically efficient. The consumption patterns have to be ecologically efficient. When these two are balanced or are made ecologically efficient, obviously the city becomes ecologically efficient. And if you remember the previous slides have shown the same, explaining the definition of ecological city, they did talk about the same thing. When we discussed about the definition of sustainable city, the globally accepted sustainable city did talk about the production and the consumption patterns as well. They said cultural. Basically, consumption and cultural, they go hand in hand. So when we further bifurcate that, we are saying that whatever we produce has to be ecologically efficient, whatever we consume has to be ecologically efficient. These two processes, which make ecologically efficient city, are further divided into five segments. One is ecologically efficient landscape, ecologically efficient production, ecologically efficient sanitation, and then we have eco-culture and eco-security. And all these five segments capture. Well, why we need to talk about these segments? We cannot use a magician's hat and take out an ecological city. Things have to be worked out towards that. while you work out towards developing an ecological efficient city or sustainable city, you need to segmentize your strategies. You need to segmentize the efforts that are required on your travel towards sustainable city. So this segmentation into 5 parts helps you to kind of develop a matrix of strategies for each one of these sectors. That's the reason precisely why these 5 have been brought up. So there's a lot of literature on that, the published literature on this particular aspect of segmenting sustainable cities into 5 of these. So basic components of sustainable city. This is coming in the way everywhere. I don't know why it's gotten rid, but for the time being, let me keep it there. So the basic components of sustainable cities, as we call eco-city development, is a healthy process towards sustainable development within the carrying capacity of the system, local ecosystem, through change of production mode, consumer behavior, and decision instrument based on ecological economics and systems engineering. So this is what is required to achieve ecological efficient city. As I said, there are 5 evolutionary components: ecological sanitation, ecological security, ecoscape, which is ecological efficient landscape, and ecological culture, ecological efficient culture, and ecological industry, and means ecological efficient production as such. Of course, they do explain ecological sanitation is basically provide citizens with a clean and healthy environment through engagement of ecologically oriented, cost affordable, and people-friendly eco-engineering for treatment, recycling of human waste. Essentially, to put it in simple terms, when you are treating your wastewater, you're all environmental engineers, I'm sure. Some of your all of your civil engineers, some of your environmental engineers. Whenever you treat wastewater, if you use anaerobic treatment method, you need to, anaerobic treatment gives out energy. If you use aerobic method, in order to aerate the system, you have to pump in the energy. So to make this process ecologically efficient, you have to use a method wherein the energy requirements are minimized. So choose a method which essentially makes your system ecologically efficient. So that the sanitation thing that we talk about, waste, sewage, and garbage management, recycling, reducing air pollution, reducing noise pollution, all these aspects. That means you are taking care of environmental services. Has to be on the principles of ecological efficiency. In fact, one of the case studies I'm going to talk about today are basically talking about that. Okay. And then we have ecological security. It provides citizens with ecologically safe, basic living conditions such as clean and safe supply of water, food, services, housing, disaster prevention. It's basically serving. Earlier one is treating, getting rid of pollution, whatever is generated, getting rid of waste, whatever is generated. But ecological security means your population and the city are secure by having access to safe water, clean air, safe food, and other services, and disaster, like resilience from the disaster, or the disaster happens, the prevention of disaster. All the systems have to be in place in any way to call the city a sustainable city. On top of it, all these service provisions have to be ecologically efficient. Meaning to say, if say for example, if you have water, you need to supply clean water to the citizens. In doing so, I don't know how many of you are aware, supply of a bottle of water involves a lot of carbon, it involves a lot of energy, right? It involves a lot of financial resources. Minimize all this in order to supply the same bottle of water to your citizens. That's what is the ecological basis for this service. So all the services that we're talking about, make them ecologically efficient. That makes the city ecologically secure. Means the city is secure with all these services, but based on ecological principles. Then we have ecological landscape. Basically, it emphasizes elevation of heat islands, hydrological deterioration, greenhouse effect, landscape patterns, and other processes. So as cities grow, in the case of compact city, for example, there are tall high-rise buildings and all that. There are concepts of heat island effect, which is very, very dangerous. So all those things can be avoided, should be avoided, and while developing that landscape, ensure that ecological principles are in place. That's what is ecoscape as part of sustainable cities. Then we have ecologically efficient culture. It deals with behavior and consumption patterns of citizens and make them ecologically conscious. Koreans, for example, have a culture where at least 14 to 15 dishes have to be there in every meal. You go to a typical Korean restaurant, ask for a typical Korean, like we have thali in India. You ask for a thali in Korea, they give a dish with at least 15 of them. And you have to, that's tradition for them. It's a cultural part of Korean household. But then, because of that, they generate a lot of waste. So their culture has a lot of food wastage. Koreans are the front runners in food waste generation. So the cultural aspects have to be changed in such a way that all these wastages doesn't happen. So the consumption patterns, similarly, in Mumbai and other cities in India, number of cars, especially, I don't say number of cars, number of automobiles, individual automobiles, especially two-wheelers, it's a steep rise. So you can't have a city having so many two-wheelers and dream to make it sustainable. Not possible. Why? The consumption patterns are such that your purchasing power is increasing, so you have more money, and so you can buy an scooter, you keep buying scooters. And where is the end from it? You can't make it sustainable. Congestion happens, accidents happen, pollution happens. All these things can't lead to a sustainable city. So those behavioral patterns have to change. Of course, that doesn't change on one side. People cannot change unless there is a means of transportation provided to them. That's also equally important for economic activity. So hand in hand, the state and the population, the people, have to bring in the cultural changes that are required, and those cultural changes or habits, new habits, have to be based on ecological principles. What is the ecological principle here? When a household, every household has different travel needs to get whatever essentials for the house, educational trips, work trips, recreational trips, health trips. There are so many, every household has. And those have to be met. So the government, on one side, government has to ensure that the public transport is available, one. Two, it should also ensure the need to travel for these requirements of the family reduces. An example, simple example, old days, it is still there in smaller towns in Andhra Pradesh for sure. The vegetable vendor goes around selling the vegetables, and every house comes to the door and buy them. In my campus here, there are like about 50 households. Every household goes at least 2.5 kilometers to get their daily foods. So how much of, and everybody goes by car, naturally everybody is well off to have a car, at least one. So how much of travel activities generated or created by the state? So because there is no small, decentralized way of vending vegetables. And we have hawkers and sometimes van hawkers, because city government is not providing those marketplaces for us. So all those things. So need to travel has to be cut off. If they have to travel, they should be made to travel by public transport. First of all, not public transport, non-motorized modes of transport. Then comes the public transport. Then comes the private vehicle. That should be the priority. So all these kind of cultural behavioral changes have to take place based on ecological efficiency. So that is fourth important component of ecological efficient city. And the last one is ecological efficient production. Again, as I said, I'm sure all of you must have heard zero waste concepts. That has come out in 1993, something like that. My BTech days. That was the first time very what do you call that? In a kind of what I'm not getting the word. Futuristically, people used to talk about something, we dream something is going to happen in future. Zero waste approach to life. That has taken shape. There are some countries, the Japanese, Koreans, and to some extent Chinese, have embarked onto it. What is this? It's basically networking industries. Industry A, Industry B, Industry C. Whatever comes out from Industry A as byproduct, say fly ash, that becomes input for another industry, say cement industry. The fly ash, which is kind of byproduct, otherwise becomes waste. It used to be big, Herculean task for the companies to store that fly ash. Now that can be used as input material for cement industry. And from whatever comes out from Industry B as say waste material can be part of input material for Industry C. And whatever Industry C is producing as waste or byproduct can potentially be part of input matrix of Industry A. So whatever is material, there are three things that comes out in the industrial process. One is product, the other is byproduct, and the last one is waste product. We have in IITs, they say BTechs are the product, postgraduates are the byproduct, and doctorates are the waste product of IIT. So like that, every industry, every institute has these things. Nothing is waste, by the way. Nothing is waste. Degree of their usefulness, potential usefulness, is what is the basis here. That's the reason why I gave the anomaly of IIT also. Of course, on a humorous note. But industries, the top priority is the product, the target product, which has the greatest value in the market. Next is byproduct, which may have some value in the market. Some byproducts may not have any value in the market. And the waste product, which most of the times do not have any value in the market. But all these material can be used. The product can be sold, byproduct and waste product. Instead of throwing it into the environment as waste, that can be used as input material. So this is called eco-industrial networking. Industries that network following ecological principles, not to waste anything into the environment, or to throw waste into the environment. That becomes, in principle, zero waste approach of industrialization, of industries. So make your production process of your city, in the city periphery, you can say, because industries are mostly in the fringe areas of cities and rural areas. So make those production lines ecologically efficient basis. Now, for example, more ambitious way, you can actually link your municipal solid waste. A lot of recyclable material is there. Link this municipal solid waste to the industrial supply line. Then we are actually integrating everything into that. That's called material cycle society concept comes up. So these 5 are the components of ecological efficiency. Once you ensure these 5 blocks falling into sustainability principles, your city invariably falls into sustainable city. You cannot work on sustainable city, but you can work on these 5 segments leading towards sustainable city as such. So that's what is the sustainable city. For any sustainability as such, there are 2 different ways people look at it. One is under environmentalism, philosophies of environmentalism, where they have a strong sustainability principles and weak sustainability principles. And the other approach is to approach the system, approach the unit as a system. That's called systems approach, wherein we have internal sustainability of the system and external sustainability of the system. Any city can be treated as a black box. It is a unit that functions. Let us assume that whatever happens in that, we don't know. I'm not worried about it. But you can say whatever comes into the black box, for the black box, which is a city here, to function. And in the process of functioning, there's something comes out, like human body. Let's assume that we are eating something goes out. So as long as the input material is in abundance, and as long as whatever is going out of this black box in the form of waste or byproduct, environment is able to take it, we can say that the system is efficient, sustainable. A city can sustain as long as the material coming in is available aplenty, and whatever is going out can be taken care by the environment without any stress. Then you can say externally this unit, which is a city in our case, is efficient, sustainable. So that's called external sustainability. What is internal sustainability? If you look at the black box, go into that, and there are a number of systems interacting there. We have transportation, we have energy, we have industrialization in the production process, we have so many other components. And as they interact, that defines the efficiency of the particular black box. So you have to make that functioning of the black box within also efficient in order to make the city totally sustainable and ecologically efficient. Otherwise, what happens? The external sustainability principle alone cannot make it sustain because internally it is unsustainable. So whatever unlimited endowment of resources we have will be taken up quickly because system is inefficient inside. So in order to make this system efficient, we have to ensure that sufficient material is coming in, sufficient material is going out. I mean, not so much of material is going out to stress the environment. And to achieve the sustainability altogether, we need to have the efficiency of the system within. Unless, I mean, these two have to work hand in hand, these two conditions have to be met completely in order to say, in order to ensure that the city, the unit we are talking about here, continues to be sustainable. So that's what it's written here. Targeting the criteria of external sustainability alone would not help sustain the system that we're talking about, and hence the human system needs to be adopted. They need to change themselves as it requires to the endowments of the natural environment. As I said, material coming in, material going out. Material coming in is a coal. All these years, possibly centuries, lot of coal is coming into the city in the form of energy. You may say that my city doesn't take coal, but if your city take electricity, which is coming from coal. Okay? So coal is aplenty, you have been using, but now the endowment of coal is coming down. So you have to adopt, you have to change, either by making the system efficient or finding an alternative. So we have to ensure that whatever is required is supplied aplenty, and also ensure that whatever is required is minimized, and then ensure that whatever is going out, environment is in a position to take on without stress. So there are two conditions of sustainability. What time is now? 3:40. We have time till what hour, Ishwar Garu? Till what time can I speak? Professor Ishwar?
Sir, up to 4:30, no problem, sir. We can.
Up to 4:30, okay. All right. As I said, the system sufficient. Please mute yourself if you don't mind. If you treat the system treat the city as one system, as I said, within that, a lot of interactions happen. Now, if you go back to the definition of sustainable city, we said economic development, environmental, the impact of on environment, and social impacts. These three have to be taken care. Now, those three spheres are the spheres that you can see on the screen here: economic activity, social requirements, and environmental load. Okay, these three: environmental load as well as environmental resources, because environment provides a lot of services, and it also takes a lot of pollution. So pollution load and environmental services put together, you can call environment. When these three interact, what defines the sustainability is not those three spheres. When economics or economic entities or economic systems interact with the social systems, we have something called distributional efficiency. When economics interact with the environment, then we have long-term allocation efficiency. Right? When the environment and social domains interact, we have environmental equity. For a system to be called sustainable, these three, the intersection areas that we have presented here, are the important ones. if your economic activity and social sphere interact in such a way that the distribution is ensured to be efficient, then your system is sustainable with respect to those two. But the distribution efficiency is not met, then you have some problems in the system, and that makes the system unsustainable. Similarly, when the economic activities and the environmental domains interact, that means environmental domains means not only air pollution, the resources allocation, for example. To produce something in economic platform, we need resources. That's what is the environment here we are talking about. So when the economic activity interacts with the environment and natural resources, the allocation of resources have to be efficiently done. If it is efficiently done, the interaction between economics and environment is efficient. But if efficiency there is not achieved, then we can say the system is inefficient. Similarly, environment and society also, if the interaction between these two comes out to be equitable environmentally, then you can say the system is efficient, sustainable. If it is not, it is unsustainable. So putting in economics terms, they are always called externalities. So the positive externalities which are advantageous, which are more towards sustainability, and there are negative externalities which are inefficiencies. So the negative externalities have to be less than the positive externalities, net put together. Then you can say the system is efficient. If the negative externalities outweigh the positive externalities coming from these interactions, then the system is inefficient. So that's how the sustainability of systems is perceived. As you can see, distributive efficiency, I told you, distributive efficiency occurs when goods and services are consumed by those who need them the most. So distributive efficiency is concerned with an equitable distribution of resources because of law of diminishing marginal return. So for example, if you are allocating resources to a person who already has 4 cars, if a person buys, the person having 3 cars, if a millionaire already has 3 cars, but he gets a 4th car, his marginal utility of the car is very, very less. Okay. Whereas if the allocation of that resource happens in such a way that the poor person or other person who doesn't have any car gets a chance to buy that car, then his marginal utility is very high because he will use it to the maximum possible extent. So that's what is the distributional efficiency. So to be distributively efficient, society will need to ensure an equitable distribution of resources. We have to allocate resources where the marginal utility is higher. If such allocation happens when the economic sphere and the societal sphere interact, the allocation happens in such a way that every allocation's marginal utility is maximum, then the system is efficient. Otherwise, it is inefficient. So if we have a system where, when in a developing country, usually have the richer becomes richer, poorer gets more poorer. The difference between these two increases, which is measured in Gini coefficient. It increases with increasing economic status in developed countries. So that is not efficient. So whenever this Gini coefficient increases, that means distributional efficiency is actually declining, depleting. So we are not leading towards sustainable cities as such, if that happens. It does tend to happen in developing countries, but as we say the growth has to be inclusive, the then Prime Minister always used to talk about inclusive growth and all that. What was my meaning is basically that. Try to see the difference doesn't blow up so big and big. Okay? So that's what is the distribution efficiency. When it comes to long-term allocation efficiency, the cost that you spend on something, the marginal cost of producing something, should be equal to marginal benefit that can be derived from that project. So a more precise definition of allocation efficiency is at an optimal level, an output level where the price equals to marginal cost. That means the money you spend to buy that, which is marginal cost, equal to, the money you spend to buy that, which is price, equal to the money that is required to produce it. That is marginal cost. So you have to produce some goods which have some demand. You should not produce some goods which do not have demand. Okay? An example is production of cars that are in great demand. Say, for example, in your society, in your city, or in your country, small cars are of great demand. But if you're producing big cars, those big cars are only meant for some elite people, for example. Then, what is more demanded is not produced, but what is less demanded is produced. If red cars are of more demand and you're producing yellow cars, the allocation efficiency is not there. Your resources allocation is not efficient at all. So that has to be ensured. So it means you're not wasting a resource. Earlier it was a distribution of what is produced. Here, producing something which is not having any great demand. So that means the price you pay will be much higher than the cost that you spend on that. Or it goes other way around. The cost that you spend is very high. The price you get is very low because there's no demand for it. Demand is there on the other commodity, but you are producing the other commodity. They don't have demand. The marginal cost is high. The price is low. It is inefficient allocation of resources, lead to depletion of resources. So when this happens, the system is not efficient. Naturally, you're spending so much, but its utility is so little. It is not efficient. The third is environmental equity. Equitable sharing of environmental impacts by a community is what makes it environmentally equitable. So development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental policies and laws to ensure that no group or community is made to bear the impacts disproportionately. Okay? That means, examples I gave here is development of roadways without proper NMT provisions. Because on the road, there are more NMT users, non-motorized modes of transport, more walkers, for example. But you are making roads which cater for the automobiles more than the walkers. So where is the equity? That equity is not there. Another example which gets you more closer to the definition of environmental injustice is the example of location of landfills in less privileged areas. Have you ever seen a landfill that is located close to ministers' bungalows? No. The landfill will be located where probably the poorest possible sections of the society live. And the location of landfill is so environmentally loading on the people living around. So where is the environmental equity there? Right? So unless those environmental equities are ensured, we can't say that city is sustainable. So these are the interactions that we consider to define whether a city is sustainable or not. So as I said, sustainability meaning positive externalities should be greater or larger than negative externalities in any particular city or system. So what defines the degree of sustainability? Connecting external sustainability, that input output endowments that I talked about, to the internal sustainability criteria, which we have just discussed, the interactions within the city black box, shows the material flow in the city. Material comes in, process in a different efficiencies, and goes out. That's input output basically, with a systemic efficiency. That's why it is called systems approach. And then we have, there are two things that happens here. One is linear metabolism in cities, wherein it comes in, whatever happens, and goes out. There is no connectivity between output and input here. Contrary to that, there is something called circular metabolism, where every output can also be used as input elsewhere in another system or within the same system. There can be recycling that happening. The waste that goes out of the city as a system can actually come back as input to the system. That's what water recycling is all about. So circular metabolism, in circular metabolism, every output can also be used as an input. Such urban ecological principles, the concept that took shape during late 70s, which is ecological efficient cities concept, it provides a root for eco-city concepts. Metabolism, circular metabolism, is a concept that took shape in the early 70s that provides the basis for eco-city concepts altogether. And putting it in a more easily understandable way, linear metabolism is there's no relation or link between resources in and resources out. In circular metabolism, resources come in, some of that is recycled within the same system, and some goes, of course, as a resource for other systems. It could be other city or it could be other system other than cities. So these are the fundamental principles of eco-city development. And as you can see, the Government of India and certain international agencies have been working on these principles and also trying to develop strategies for if somebody wants to attempt making their city sustainable. Now, the urban green growth strategies for Indian cities was a study conducted by National Institute of Urban Affairs and ICLEI, Japan, and Global Green Growth Institution, USA. These people have come up with this illustrative table of possible objectives for Indian cities to become sustainable. Now, what we spoke so far is encapsulated in this table. Economic objectives of eco-cities, one talks about, is there should be growth. It should be adding to the growth. That means cities should be economically productive units. They should add to GDP. That's a fact. All cities are the economic engines of the country, of any country for that. So they have to continue to be economically vigorous. So they should add to the growth of GDP. They should generate a lot of employment. That means the systems or activities within the city must generate a lot of employment. When you devise a system or devise a solution to improve the system's efficiency of a particular functionality in the city, we have to keep in mind that it has to do the economic progression and also it should generate employment. Then only it is moving towards sustainability. Otherwise, it's not. Then we have city competitiveness. Cities have to be more competitive because that's where the economic prosperity comes in. Why Hyderabad has so much of surplus flowing in, why Vijayawada and Visakhapatnam doesn't have any surplus flowing in? The competitiveness. The competitiveness it results in attracting companies, it attracts industries, and it attracts talent also. Any talented person today would want to be in Hyderabad than in Visakhapatnam because there are more opportunities there, there are more industries there, there are more pays there, salaries there. All right, the competitiveness of cities has to be ensured to make the city sustainable. And then better infrastructure. Of course, all this is linked to better infrastructure. I don't know whether to say Hyderabad has better infrastructure. With a little bit of rain, it's getting underwater. But it is far from calling it a sustainable city. So we can still say that Hyderabad has better infrastructure compared to say Vijayawada, Tirupati, or Vizag. So one has to ensure that these things are there to meet the definition. The part of definition in sustainable city is economic prosperity. So these are the ones to be ensured. Social objectives, equity and inclusiveness, gender equity, deprived sections inclusiveness, all these things have to be ensured. We can't say city equitable or sustainable if women are not safe there. You see? Quality of life has to be better. If you remember eco secure. Drinking water has to be good quality. Sanitation service has to be good. Air has to be clean. So all this basically lead to quality of life. That's social dimensions. Though they appear to be environmental dimensions, but they are actually social dimensions. And then you have basic services have to be in place, good basic services like education, health service, recreation, and then clean and beautiful city. City has to be clean for sure, and green spaces and parks to walk, to maintain good health and all that. So those are the social objectives. And then participation. Unless people participate, a city can never ever be sustainable. I think let me go a little faster. And the resilience and reduced vulnerability, cities have to be resilient for natural calamities, and they should be less vulnerable. These are the social dimensions to make a city sustainable city. And then environmental objectives, we need to have clean air, clean water, green and open spaces, biodiversity has to be protected. We have a lot of urban forestry these days, and then low energy footprints. The more energy, the more pollution, the more use of resources. So these are the three pillars and objectives that are set for any sustainable city. I mean, all this actually invariably gets into those 5 segments that we talk about. Okay, but these are the ones reported by this particular study. So I'm just presenting it to you, which only converges with what the basic thing explained to you earlier. So they also made scenarios where business as usual, if you go as it is without changing anything, no consumption pattern changes, no production pattern changes, the impact that we have today will invariably keep exponentially increasing as we move forward. The impact area will get larger and larger, business as usual. Efficient green growth efficiency measures that are applied to be different sectors in a city in an incremental way, a little bit of changes. That is the efficient green growth, which is an incremental way. A little bit of betterment in the situation will be there. But then third type is the transformative green growth by taking up integrated approach towards the system's efficiency can actually has potential to bring down the impacts. I mean, it won't grow any further. I mean, it may be almost the same level. It may increase a little bit because we have not reached the maturation stage of those. But as it reaches the maturation stage, we will start having a decline, which may invariably over a period of time reach present status. So, eco-cities, any city that is aspiring to take up initiatives for eco-city may fall either into B or C categories, depending on what you're talking. Some initiatives have potential to be in the category of B, smaller retrofitting type of a thing. Some initiatives that I will going to explain we have potential to be in the category C. Okay, so that's how one will approach sustainable cities, execution of things towards sustainable cities. So I will explain you 2 case studies. I think I have less time. I will try to be faster with these case studies, but nevertheless, we'll give you the necessary essence of what I want to say. The case study to demonstrate the initiatives towards realizing sustainable cities. Now, we know what it takes to be sustainable city and how one should approach probably. When I said those 5 spheres, or even when I said these 3 categories that are identified by NIUA and ICLEI and other agency, let's assume that we are taking up some studies. I mean, we are trying to realize those, spheres, 5 spheres put together, the largest sphere of ecological efficient city. Within those 5 spheres, there will be a number of initiatives to achieve each sphere: eco-security, eco-landscape, or eco-culture. Within that each segment, there will be a large number of initiatives. So I'm trying to explain 2 of those initiatives, which would add to such kind of eco-city progression. Right? So the first one is managing municipal solid waste in a decentralized community participation model. As I said, ecological services, so waste management has to be based on ecological principles. That one I'm trying to explain to you by means of a case study here, which follows the principles of ecological efficiency, managing municipal solid waste in a decentralized and community participation model that follows the principles of ecological efficiency and the principles of social inclusion, environmental friendliness, economic augmentation, including employment generation. So all these aspects we will be observing in the case study that we are going through now. Anytime ecosystems, ecological efficient systems based approach in solving the waste management problem in developing cities in Asia, first we have to see what is the situation, because situation provides the basis for solutions. That's why no solution can be repeated. Every solution is unique in social background. Solutions are derived based on fundamental situation. Now, in waste management, the fundamental problems or situation is we have high moisture content, high organic fraction of waste, which is less attractive for informal sectors. The rag pickers need plastic and glass, not plankton leaves or kitchen waste. Right? Poor collection efficiency. Many of the cities do not have good collection efficiency. Low or no recycling and processing of waste. In official process line of waste management, municipal waste management, we don't have processing in the country because it's very difficult to process the waste that is not segregated at source. Then we have poor disposal practices. A lot of open dumping is still rampant in the country. We don't have too many landfills as yet. Poor financial management. I'm sure you are in Andhra and you must be paying waste collection charge for a change, which I have been saying for a long time that that's a problem. But the context is different though. But poor financial management means free service provided by the municipality. Waste is a service provided by the municipality. When you go and buy a water bottle, you pay for it. When you take an auto rickshaw from your college to your house, it's a service provided by the auto rickshaw to transport, and you pay for it. But the waste that is managed by municipality, the waste that you generated every day, you don't pay for it. And as a result, they don't have sufficient financial strength to manage it better. That's one problem, poor financial management. No partnerships. Government has to do it all alone. Trade companies don't come and participate because this is not a profitable thing. Of course, you will be having a number of questions lingering in your mind when I say all this. We'll see if I can address some of those questions at the end. But take it as a kind of macro observation. If you go to micro level, there could be a number of examples which are sporadic, that cannot make the generalized statement about partnerships. So no partnerships that happen on a significant scale. Poor public awareness and participation. I myself don't, conditions are not apt to do that. We can't take it to a particular garbage bin and put it carefully. It's not conducted to do that. We may just throw it like that. Even I may have to do that. So the participation, we don't segregate the waste at source. That's basic participation of people in waste management. So the poor participation and awareness also. Awareness, I'm not very sure. Even educated people don't do that. So, but on a paper, you can say poor public awareness and participation, and a non-segregation of waste, fundamental problem. Then a dominant informal sector consisting of urban poor. I don't know how many people are actually aware of the problem of urban poor that are involved in waste management, informal sector. It's actually a very serious social problem. And the environmental complications. A lot of pollution happens, air pollution because waste is burnt, and water pollution because seepage of leachate. So these are the conditions of waste management. Now, we are trying to see what exactly is the condition, and we need to find a solution, and how that solution can be based on ecological principles that we discussed here. Okay. So, and as you can see here, because of open dumping, we have bad order in those areas. Real estate value will be less. A lot of greenhouse gases get emitted, and it's a major problem. And then we have spreading of diseases because of unhygienic conditions there. Then leachate, they pollute groundwater, as I said, and surface water also sometimes. And a lot of air pollution also happens as they get burnt in this case. And then environmental and health problems of urban areas because of all. So that's the present situation. And so we need innovation to meet the gaps. Cities can't continue with conventional management practice, which is with very poor systemic efficiency. The conventional management practice is, one, very poor. It's a self-explanatory statement for you. Insignificant public participation and awareness. Scarce land availability. We are talking about cities here, Mumbai, for example. We don't have land. So you can't continue with the conventional waste management practice here. Forget about making it sustainable. You can't even run it unsustainably. The practice has to stop. Okay. Deeper involvement of urban poor in informal management. Just I think read somewhere. Informal sector's contribution has gone beyond 80% in the GDP of cities. In light of that particular fact, imagine how significant the COVID's impact on these people. Their employment is basically coming from there. Most of the governments, including Government of India, has kind of failed to generate large-scale employment in organized sector. These are unorganized sector. So impacts are very high. The point is deeper involvement of that unorganized sector is an important thing, and it cannot continue to be like that, right? And increasing generation of waste. Now, cities, as we have throwaway culture, we have water bottles, or we have cans, or we have plastic bins. So much of waste is being generated. Increasing generation of waste is a major problem. Conventional approach cannot handle that. And then with municipalities finding it difficult to finance. So this is the conventional problems with the conventional waste management practice. So it needs innovative approach by using principles of decentralization, because 75%, most of the municipalities around the world, 75% of the waste management expenditure goes for transportation, collection and transportation. So to cut it off, to offset that, we need to make it decentralized. There's no other way. Partnership among public institutions, private sector, and the public. It is very important. MSW is a service provision involving huge expenditure. We need partnerships. Doesn't work otherwise. How long the municipalities can pay that? Business model where risks and benefits are shared equitably. Business models invariably have risks and benefits, and they have to be shared equitably for the partnership to prosper. Otherwise, it won't. So in this waste sector, risks are very high, benefit sharing is not uniform. One of the reasons why the partnerships doesn't happen in waste sector. So that has to be addressed. And enhance public awareness and participation. Do whatever. Unless public participates, nothing will work. So you have to do that also. So taking these the four essential ingredients, a model was developed by two gentlemen in Dhaka. That's called the Waste Concern is an organization in Dhaka. They developed this particular model, community-based decentralized composting model of waste management, where they have ensured all these components. They have payments, they have involved urban poor for better payments and hence better livelihood for them. Segregation at source they ensured by door-to-door collection as well as awareness. They made a small group of unemployed youth there as green force. They went around. They were trained by these gentlemen, and they went around creating awareness in households. So segregation was achieved because of that. Improved participation. People did participate in a much better way. Reduced transportation costs because everything is decentralized. It's a community management. They don't have to transport this waste all the way to the dump site. Useful compost. Because its waste is segregated, they could make quality compost available, and that's useful compost because in Dhaka they did not have green revolution as yet, so the soil rejuvenation is not happening. So they need organic fertilizer to rejuvenate the soil quality, and this provided a solution for them, and they could reduce a lot of greenhouse gases in the process. Because this compost, organic fraction, if it goes to landfill in anaerobic conditions, you get a lot of greenhouse gas. Because they're handling it in aerobic composting here, the greenhouse gas is offset. Then improved disposal, a lot better disposal practice there. Effective recycling, because whatever waste is collected and segregated to wet and dry, the dry waste which is recyclable, efficiency of recycling has improved because they're not mixed. So separation is easier, processing is cheaper. And then reduced transportation costs, as I explained to you. Partnership and business model, they ensure that there is a business model embodied in and the partnership clearly developed. So that's what is this model all about. Okay, and then So Dhaka waste scenario, like, so much of waste is generated here, 3,500 tons, slightly a few years back. Numbers must have changed now, but doesn't make any difference for you. Only part of it is collected and transported by the department. Only 22% of urban poor have access to municipal waste collection beams. That is alarming. And compostable fraction of waste is very high. So suitable for composting as such. This is the kind of characteristics of municipal solid waste in Dhaka. Food and organic waste, as you can see, is significant. This one, and then paper, the remaining compostable fraction, but not recyclable fraction is not so high, but not so low as well. Then we have the present practice is to collect the waste in a mixed way. They don't separate it at source. Transportation is done using open trucks, and it was taken and put into open dumps. And they spend about 2,445 chakas to dispose a ton of waste every day, which is significantly high. Due to lack of proper coordination and poor stakeholder participation, efficiency of solid waste management is very, very low in Dhaka at that point in time. So there are 120,000 rag pickers in Dhaka, retrieving about 15% of the recyclable material. That means a lot is going wasted because of non-segregation of waste. Rag picking activity can be found at different stages of waste management. And it was reported that even at that efficiency of collection of recyclables, about $2.63 million every year is retrieved by these rag pickers. So, which indicates the important role that this informal sector plays in waste management in Dhaka. And these rag pickers have mostly women and children. They retrieve only inorganic material. Organic material is not touched by that because it has no market value. So adding another dimension to this complication, land availability in Dhaka was fast declining at that time, and the dump sites are nearing closure. So they need to find some alternative way. So Waste Concern came, an NGO came with a new model, and the plan and implemented a public, private, and community people participation model, which is based on composting process. So the components of Dhaka model, as I told you, mobility of community for waste collection, segregated collection of waste, and participation properly. Then identification of appropriate technology for the waste composting. I'll explain you in a while. Then establishment of a demonstration plan, because it's a decentralized approach. First, they make a small unit, make it work, and let it be a demonstration plan. And looking at it, other communities start picking it up. So that's the approach they have taken. And marketing strategies. As more and more communities started picking up this practice, there will be more and more compost getting generated. So what they did, marketing strategies of compost also they have developed. They have gone in a partnership with fertilizer company and pesticide company. And they facilitate, because they can't come and sign contract with every small community. This Waste Concern NGO facilitated those contracts and ensure that partnership continue. Partnership, sharing of benefits among actors. I will explain you how the benefits are shared, and they ensure that financially this model is viable. That's very, very important. This is a model: decentralized composting, marketing of compost, house-to-house waste collection, and training and awareness among the public. So these are the important components of the model. This is a model. I think I'll explain later. This is a model. Waste is collected, and the sorting is done. Then whatever material that is sorted, organic fraction is piled up, and using sawdust, cow dung, and water, which are required for the composting process here. They pile it up and then try to make it upside down manually. They use windrow technique here, as you can see in this image. And then the composting process is done by adding water to maintain moisture there. Once it is matured and compost gets generated, they screen it using sieves. Whatever is remaining on the sieve is sent back to this piling whatever goes through the screen is bagged, which is compost, which is bagged, and then sent for marketing. This is how the flow line of this process. For a 3 ton per day capacity plant, which was a demonstration plant in that case, they needed 6 workers for collection of waste and 10 workers for composting process. So these 16 workers are basically rag pickers, originally, in a very pathetic conditions of work. But they were given gloves and protective gear and all that. Their life has improved. Okay, that's one part. I'll explain you then how this match with the list that are suggested by NIUA and ICLEI institutions. Now, daily house-to-house collection was done. There are 1,430 households participated in this community. Capacity of rickshaw van that have kind of or manually pulled rickshaws are there. They made it 2 cabins. One is for wet and one is for dry. And the capacity was this much. So 3 tons of organics a day. Recyclable is only 6% there. The moisture control is maintained here manually only. Temperature control is also done, like turning once in a 3 to 4 day cycle, making it upside down. The compost process requires total 55 days in an aerobic process, and it gives about 500 to 600 kg compost produced every day by processing 2 to 3 tons of waste. This is 3 ton capacity plant. So it is like for 3 tons of waste, you get about 500 tons. 500 kgs of compost. This is the process. So in this, there are actors. Public is UNDP gave seed funding, Ministry of Environment and Forest to give permissions and all that. Municipal Corporation, the Public Works Department is a public actor. Private actor is NGO Waste Concern, and the fertilizer and pesticide company is the private actor. So here, they do different activities. NGO ensures the quality of compost. It's important to have good quality compost. And it also facilitates communities in establishing the treatment plants. And communities, basically, they participate in the door-to-door waste collection and then create this compost and then sell it to the companies which are in partnership. And these companies, they buy the compost, raw compost from the community bins and enrich it to be marketable. See, if you take waste-derived compost, nobody buys because you can't apply it. Compost, fertilizer, if you see, is a fine granules. You just effortlessly apply. That's very important to have the effortless application process. Otherwise, you can't apply it in the field. So the compost, which is like a wettish powder, you can't apply. Nobody buys that. Farmers won't buy that, no matter how good it is. So this company made it into granules so that it looks the same, but slightly dark in color. So, but application is a lot easier. Another important dimension is NPK value. No farmer buys a fertilizer unless it meets the specified NPK value that he wants. So the fertilizer company, what they did, they buy this raw compost and then try to enhance this NPK value to the desired NPKs. Like paddy has a different NPK, wheat has different NPK, you know. And then once they made it, they have their own network. So farmer doesn't buy something new usually. He buys only when the shop where he buys usually say, this is a new thing, a good thing came, you try, he'll take it. So they use the existing network of pesticide and fertilizer products, sold this compost in that. So that's how this works. Okay, now cutting it short. So this is what is the distribution of risk and benefit equitably among all actors, government, private, and community. That's very important for this model to work. Let me not spend too much time on that. Now moving further, the project was finally found to be financially viable. Fixed cost of 3 ton capacity plant was found to be $8,800. Operational cost per year is $10,208 for all salaries and materials and all that. Per year income from the project is $14,800. They get contributions from households and all that, and selling the compost. So 70% is income from sale proceeds of the compost out of this 14,000, and 30% is from house-to-house waste collection charges. The net earning found to be $4,598. And the portion of net earnings from the project amounting to 2,500 is used for waste concern for testing the compost at government lab to ensure the quality of compost, as well as waste concerns monitoring fee. They charge a little bit of monitoring fee, while the balance 2,098 is deposited in a separate account for each community maintained by waste concern. This amount is used for repair and maintenance of those compost plants, making those rickshaw vans partitioned into wet and dry, and dresses for workers. All these basic things need to be provided to those workers. So they were using that. So payback period for the investment that they made is 23 months. That means within 2 years, whatever is invested, they could recover. From then, it becomes self-sufficient, if not profitable. Okay, so this is the Dhaka model. As I said, important technology suitable technology is very important, and composting is a bit smelly. Rich locations won't accept it. So they made, this is the aerator type composting in open area, the middle one. Richer locations won't accept this mosquitoes and fly menace, smell and all that. For them, they adopted it to say box type compost. They made a kind of proper structure and proper ventilation process. It is less smelly. So they kind of adopted it to the local conditions on right side. Left side is slums. There are a number of slums in Dhaka. And again, they don't have big land in slums to have open air this composting process, windrow composting process. They have adapted it for barrel type. They have kind of water tank kind of a thing. They partitioned it in the middle. They put compost, and then as it gets composted, part of it is removed, and top layer continues to be composted, bottom layer is removed. So they adapted the technology to the conditions, and it went absolutely successful. The same can be applied to large number of cities in the country. Hyderabad and Telangana state have given the details here. You don't have to go through that, but simply to say that we have such conditions in Indian cities as well. Can be applied. It's not successful. It's a different story. If I come again later to explain you the Dhaka model in more detail, that will explain you why this is not successful elsewhere and what we have identified. I went there as a part of Japanese litigation at the time. I was working in Japan at the time. So I went there, we studied it, we applied AHP technique to find what the strategy is. It's a different story. We'll come again later some other time. Now, if you look at the strategies that are identified by NIUA and ICLEI, economic objectives, social objectives, environmental objectives, the model that I have presented just now invariably has all that, many of them. Employment, it has created employment. See? 3 people and 10 people, I think 6 people and 10 people, 16 people for every 3 tons of waste plant. They're employed. So the employment generation is there. Waste concern alone cannot do all that. There need to be more and more such people involved. Laboratories have to be there to test the compost on a regular basis. So there is a great potential for employment. Yeah. So the solution that we think of for cities to improve the systems of the city, it has to meet all these 3 criteria as we have presented here. And this example that I gave you now, yes, it met employment generation criteria. City competitiveness. The moment you imply this particular model, the city has become much cleaner. You don't find waste being dumped on the roads and all that because waste is collected door to door. So you find a lot of city, the cleanliness of the city has changed, and then the competitiveness improves because of that. Okay, and then social objectives, equity and inclusiveness. There are many women who are involved in this particular model because rag pickers are all mostly women and children. So that aspect is addressed. Quality of life of those people has improved, rag pickers, and quality of life in the city dwellers also has improved. Because you don't find garbage on the roadsides anymore. You don't find organic fraction of waste dumped in open dumps where it becomes filthy and then all nonsense happens. That changed. So the quality of life, it helped improve the quality of life. And then participation. You find community participation so much. informal sector participates, rag pickers participate, poorer sections of the society participates, and every household participates. So the participation has improved, and resilience and reduction of vulnerability. In Mumbai, 2005, 965 millimeters of rain fell on one day, and entire Mumbai was underwater for about 2 floors level of water. And because waste is dumped everywhere, and then all these drains were clogged and blocked by this garbage. So that makes city very vulnerable to climate, catastrophic events like heavy rainfall and all that. That's what is happening in Hyderabad as well. So this particular practice, if you implement, the dumping of garbage in drains and all will be there. And so it helps cities' resilience and also reduce vulnerability to climatic variabilities. Okay? And then clean air, it helps no burning of waste, air pollution control, no dumping of organic fraction of waste in open dumps, so seepage of leachate doesn't happen, so contamination of water doesn't happen. Green and open spaces, yes, as you don't have waste dumping, there are more spaces, there can be greenery coming up there, and then low energy footprint. In this process, a lot of transportation is avoided. So a lot of energy saved there. And a lot of compost is generated. That's basically energy that is generated. So low energy footprint, low carbon footprint is also achieved by this particular initiative. So as you try to take up initiatives to make your city more sustainable, you have to ensure, you have to keep all these points in mind, that the solution not only provide an answer for the problem there, but has this multifacetedness in providing the solution. So this is one example. I thought it is very close to what we spoke, and the efficiency part as we talked about. Allocation of efficiency, allocation of long-term allocation efficiency. You provide something that is in more demand. Here, the compost is more in demand. You provide only waste management as a service, but there is a demand for compost. So you try to provide this compost to the agriculture field in Dhaka because it's need of the hour there. So when you provide a solution, you have to ensure that the resources are allocated in such a way that you get maximized marginal, the marginal cost of providing that should be less than the price that you get. Similarly, distributional efficiency, also in such initiatives, distribution efficiency, or even environmental equity. More appropriate is environmental equity. Here, all sections of the society bear whatever difficulty comes or whatever benefit comes environmentally. All sections of the society enjoy it equally. If it has to be taken, will be taken equally as a burden. So environmental equity is ensured in this particular initiative as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I think I will stop here. I have another case in the transportation as such, but I think I have spoken enough for you to grapple. Let me not bother you too much, so that bothering you over a point unnecessarily dilutes whatever is communicated and learned. So to make it more effective for you, let me stop here. I would have explained another case where, and I also map with all these strategies that are suggested by National Institute of Urban Affairs while working towards sustainable city. So yeah, one more example would have been there, but nevertheless, you have learned enough on this. So shall I stop here, Professor Ishwar?
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, our experts are they have gone for a principal HOD's meeting with the principal.
Whatever, I mean, whoever is taking care, shall I stop here because you said 4:30, now it is already 4:30.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So just to conclude, I will just conclude saying that the last slide I will show you. Yeah, to the demonstrated solutions, of course, here I have shown only one solution. It also addresses the intersecting spheres of sustainable development, that is distributive efficiency, long-term allocation efficiency, and environmental equity, as I have explained to you already, of course. And such initiatives lead to green growth of cities, naturally, some are incremental and some are transformative. Now, this solid waste management example that I have explained to you has the potential to be transformative. Okay, because it can completely change the scenario of the waste management. And if that kind of a decentralized public, private, and community partnership models can be devised in other areas of service provision within the city, that can bring transformative changes. The incremental changes, I don't know whether you are connecting yourself to this or not. Just let me take back to the place where I have explained you this. Yeah, here. As the National Institute of Urban Affairs explained, there can be three different scenarios, green growth scenarios. The third is transformative growth. Second is kind of incremental growth. Now, the waste model that I explained to you just now has potential to be called transformative growth because it can bring a transformational change in the system. Whereas the transportation problem that I was thinking to explain has, because that is a retrospective, retrofitting type of an initiative where there exists an ongoing project, it is planned and being implemented, but then he found that it can be retrofitted for these retrofitted to ensure it has better distribution efficiency and better long-term allocation efficiency and better environmental equity. Those retrofits can be added on, and we have done a retrofit analysis based on incrementality as a background, and you found necessary benefits for that incremental cost that we are proposing. So it is feasible, but on top of it, those things will have potential to contribute incremental green growth scenario. Right? Some parts can be changed. Whereas the waste management case that I explained has potential to bring in transformational changes. So the point is, some strategies that you work towards addressing those 5 spheres that we discussed earlier, some of them may have transformative change prospects, some may have incremental change prospects. So it has to be a combination of many such initiatives under each sphere, 5 spheres that we talked about, and that helps. A combination of these makes the cities grow towards the same path. So I will stop here. I thank you all participants for listening to me patiently. And again, apologies for coming a few minutes late in the beginning. That was due to technical problem that we have here, which is unusual. We never had it so far. The first time I had, but apologies for that. And again, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact, to present myself in front of you. And I think for next few minutes, possibly 10-15 minutes, if you have any questions, anything to discuss, I'll be very happy to interact with you. Thank you so much.
We thank you very much, sir, for a very busy schedule. You accepted our invitation and honored us today by wonderful and excellent lecture you are giving on this green sustainable cities, basic constructs and the strategies. So you imparted us with a lot of knowledge, sir, us participants. Thank you very much, sir.
Any questions from the participants?
Participants, please, you can raise any questions.
Yeah, why no questions from any participants? These participants are all faculties in different institutions or what?
Yes, sir. Multidisciplinary.
Young faculty or senior faculty?
All mixed, sir.
It's a mixed faculty, mixed disciplines. Right.
Sir, I have a question, sir. Shall I ask, sir?
Please, can you tell your name?
Sir, Ishwar Reddy, sir.
Oh, Ishwar Reddy, tell me.
Yeah, now we joined.
Shall I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, see, in smart city planning, sir, how this sustainability is to be embedded in the planning itself.
Yeah, that's what I was, I mean, that's a central thing. As you plan the cities, you have to plan the segments. You can't plan the city as it is, but you plan the segments. When you say, for example, eco security. When you plan eco security, you have to provide them with clean water. While providing them with clean water, ensure that the amount of carbon embodied, amount of energy embodied in supplying water is the minimum possible. And that can be achieved in a number of ways. For example, it depends on the gradient of the land, water supply. Then, while planning that particular thing, you have to ensure that ecological principles are brought in to minimize the energy requirement for water supply, for example. So, a city plan will have different components. One of the components belong to the eco-security domain that we discussed here. Within that, there will be a number of initiatives to make part of the plan. Those initiatives, when you devise those initiatives, you have to ensure that basically low carbon, low energy, and low emission principles are binding there. And like that, all initiatives that will make part of the plan, central plan, will ensure that you are working towards sustainability of the city. And that's how it is planned actually.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, lastly, that you explained about decentralized municipal solid waste management at the Dhaka, sir.
Again, please.
Yeah, sir, you have explained one case study, sir. Decentralized municipal solid waste management at Dhaka.
Yes.
Similar to that, in here also in Tamil Nadu, in Vellore they are doing, sir.
Okay.
I have seen that. The same, similar, sir.
I know Joseph Kurian is there. He is the one who works on waste management, and he's also probably know this particular case. But the problem is this case, this Dhaka decentralized composting model will work only if it spreads across. The scaling up is very important here because in order to have fertilizer or pesticide company get involved in this in a partnership, they need to have a larger operationality. A small compost will not help them because they have to invest in the capital investments have to take place for enrichment of the compost, and also they have to demonstrate on the field. For all that, the scale of operation is important. So unless you successfully replicate these decentralized composting plants in the city, the partnership wouldn't come up. Unless the partnership comes up, these will not work at a large scale. Some small pilot scale thing may be working, but to make it work at a city level, you need to have the scaling up process, which doesn't happen in our country. That's the problem.
Sir, but the city can be divided into different regions, now, sir. Small regions, and it can be done.
City can be divided into small regions. There's no problem, but unless there is sufficient scaling up happens, fertilizer company would not be part of this model.
Okay.
As long as the fertilizer company does not participate in this process, the model will collapse.
But fertilizer company means this what is composted can be taken up by the villagers. No, it can be sent to the nearby villages.
That means you have not handled the villagers first hand. Villagers would not buy the compost because the application of compost in agriculture practice is not possible unless it is enriched and made into granules.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Making that into granules is one part. The second part is, say for example, if the farmer is doing paddy,
Yes, sir.
he has a specific NPK requirement in fertilizer.
Yeah.
And this compost has no such control. What is N, what is P, what is K in the compost is not in your control.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
So what they want is different and what you are supplying is different. Why will they buy it?
Okay.
So it has to be enriched, not only made into granules, but it has to be enriched to the specified NPK values, then only they'll buy.
Okay.
All this has to be done by the fertilizer company.
Okay.
And for the fertilizer company to come and do all this, it needs certain capital investment because some equipment has to be brought in, manpower has to be employed. For all that, they need minimum scale of operation.
Yes, sir.
That minimum scale of operation happens only when the scaling up of this particular pilot happens in the city. So it has to expand into a number of communities. Then there is sufficient compost coming up for the fertilizer company to buy and then enrich and sell in the market.
Yes.
So this scaling up process is a very slow process. Somehow in India so far we did not see that kind of scaling. There are sporadic success stories at a very one or two location, but scaling the process that happened in Dhaka did not happen in India. There are a number of reasons for that. There are a number of strategies to overcome that also. But yeah, fact is that India has not successfully implemented this model so far. I really wanted to do, but paucity of time, I'm not able to take it up. Once I thought of going and meeting Honorable Chief Minister KCR and implement this, but that did not happen because I had to take over as Vice Chancellor and all these things happened.
Yes, sir.
We will see.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else, please? Any other concern? Any other question? Okay. Okay, sure, I think nobody else has any question. I'm done for
Yeah,
my
sir.
side.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your valuable time. So it's very fortunate to have you and to associate with you, sir, since long years. I do remember 2012 onwards, we are traveling together on different occasions. I'm very thankful to you, sir.
Thank you.
We need your guidance, so especially in environmental related areas.
Yeah, come down sometime, or we'll meet once the pandemic subsides.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'll quit the meeting.
Bye, sir.
Thank you. Bye bye. Take care, all of you.